Thank you, everybody, for being here, and I see Representative Cerisi. Thank you for being here, and the others who are joining me today. Today, I want to talk about charter schools. Charter schools in Pennsylvania provide an absolutely important service. We know that every student learns differently, and charter schools give those students a chance to learn differently and tailor education that works for them. Some charter schools in Pennsylvania are just doing an outstanding job, and they're outstanding institutions, and they have a solid track record of giving students excellent education that puts all of those students on a path to success. But the way the law is set up, we can't guarantee that every charter school is actually giving every student the education we need that student to get. Pennsylvania's charter school law is among the worst in the country. And because of that, many charter schools are charging taxpayers too much money. At the same time, they're providing a really poor education for their students. The problem is more important right now than ever before. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, enrollment at charter schools, and especially the cyber charter schools, has skyrocketed in the past year. And if we don't fix the problems in our charter schools now, we're going to be setting up students for failure. And, that's a problem. We're also charging taxpayers too much. Taxpayers are paying too much. So both of these things are unacceptable. We must make changes to the way we fund and the way we operate charter schools if we want to provide the best education possible to young Pennsylvanians. We must remember that charter schools and cyber charter schools are still public schools. They're funded by our tax dollars. And the amount all of us pay for these schools is skyrocketing. In 2021, taxpayers can expect to pay nearly $3 billion on charter schools. But because charter schools are not held accountable to the same standards as traditional public schools, we don't have the same transparency. We don't have the same accountability in how they spend our tax dollars. While again, there are some very high quality charter schools, there are also many charter schools that are not providing the quality education that our students deserve. And this is especially true for many cyber charter schools. In fact, the majority of Pennsylvania's cyber charter schools are among the lowest performing schools in our Commonwealth. And they are designated, many of these, designated by the federal government for school improvement. Many cyber charter schools graduate fewer than 2/3 of their students. When funding is redirected to these poorly performing schools, that means less money that's left over for students who remain in traditional public school classrooms. And this has real consequences that harms students and communities by forcing school districts to cut learning programs and raise taxes. The current charter school funding formula is unfair. It does not reflect the cost of education at a charter school, and the special education formula does not account for the real needs of individual students at those schools. The lack of transparency and ethics requirements in our charter law makes understanding and remedying these problems more difficult. The limited oversight of charter schools makes it difficult to control costs and quality. School districts faced with financial uncertainty and tuition burdens caused by our charter law are forced to raise property taxes. Again, that is not the intent of the charter school law. When the charter school law was drafted, the intent was to bolster our education system. Instead, that outdated law has become, in some cases, little more than a license for draining funds from traditional schools while providing a poor education to students. Today, I'm announcing legislation that would hold charter schools and cyber schools accountable for providing a good education. My plan protects the quality of education for all students. It protects taxpayers from uncontrolled and unaccountable rising costs. And it protects the public trust by increasing transparency of for-profit companies that manage many of these charter schools. This is not the first time I've made a proposal like this. For years, I have advocated for better oversight of charter schools to improve education outcomes for students. Unfortunately, I cannot act unilaterally to reform our cyber charter law. That's going to require the act of the legislature. It's going to require for them to come to an agreement on the best way to move forward. And I'm pleased to have many partners in the legislature on both sides of the aisle who are also raising concerns about charter school management and working to fix our broken charter school law. In particular, I want to thank Representative Cerisi, Leader McClinton, Appropriations Chair Matt Bradford, who recently sent me a letter, by the way, on this topic. They asked that the Pennsylvania Department of Education review how cyber charter schools spent the COVID-19 emergency federal relief funds and whether those expenditures were in compliance with federal laws, regulations, and guidelines. As the authorizer of cyber charters, the Pennsylvania Department of Education has begun a review process to look into these concerns. And I also want to thank Representative Cerisi and Senators Brewster and Lindsey Williams, who've sponsored legislation to reform our broken charter school law. I hope to see a bill with concrete, sustainable changes to the charter school law come to my desk this year. It's time to fix our charter schools. It's time to fix our charter school law, to help students succeed, to reduce burdens on school districts and taxpayers, and give parents confidence that their child is getting the best quality education available no matter where they learn. Ensuring that students get a high quality education, we need that. And that's what's important, and that's the investment we all need to make in our futures. That's going to help us build a better Pennsylvania. It's going to help us build a better education system. So thank you, and now I'm going to turn this over to Representative Joe Cerisi. Joe.
Well, thank you so much, Governor, and thank you for working with us and talking about charter school and cyber charter school reform. I'm Representative Joe Cerisi. As the Governor stated, I represent the 146th District in the western part of Montgomery County. And I come to this bill in a different fashion. I served 12 years as a school board member and saw the front lines of what this was doing to our districts. And like the Governor stated, this does not change the opportunity for students to be able to attend a charter school. This bill enhances the opportunity and saves our taxpayers the money that they should be saved and gives some control back to the local districts. We saw for years as we sat at the board table, different things come across us and we would question, well, why are we doing this? Where are the answers? Where is the accountability? And as we look at House Bill 272, we know that this bill begins to correct that problem. And we come to this as a bipartisan committee. This bill has both Democrats and Republicans already signed on to it. And we work together to find the solution. Look, we have seniors who we hear all the time, they're on fixed incomes and their taxes are going up. And as school board members, you're responsible to make sure that tax dollars are used wisely. And this makes accountability. This brings in the system of the special ed funding, the same way our school districts are being funded. It puts in place some metrics to make sure that every faculty member in the charter school and our school districts are treated equally and the way they're teaching our students, and make sure that we're accountable to our students. But let me tell you what else it does. Over $229 million is the possible savings of this bill. And I'm going to give you an example of what that means to a couple of districts. I represent 4 districts: Springford, Perkiomen Valley, Pottsgrove, and Pottstown. Pottstown is one of the most underfunded districts in the state at a deficit of almost $14 million a year. This gives $1 million back to the Pottstown School District so they can add money into their budgets for educational purposes, and add money into for teachers and faculty. But let's talk across the Commonwealth. In the Coatesville area, it saves almost $14 million. In Allentown, $3 million. Erie, $2.5. Pittsburgh, $11 million. And Philadelphia, $64 million. These are significant savings by retaining the opportunity for every child to have that choice to continue to go to their charter schools. And as the Governor stated, we have some great charter schools that are out there. And I don't want anyone to think that this is about that. This is about giving local control back, by the spending, and making sure that everyone is treated equally. I want to thank you for the opportunity again, Governor Wolf. I look forward to working with your administration and our Senate and moving this bill forth as a bipartisan bill to make sure that our children have everything they need and our taxpayers are protected. I want to turn it over to my colleague now, Senator Lindsey Williams in the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Cerisi, and thank you to Governor Wolf and all of you who are joining us today. I'm State Senator Lindsey Williams, and I represent District 38 in Allegheny County.
Hit every point.
We know that school districts have been struggling with rising charter school costs for years. They have been passing these costs on to students by cutting services or not expanding programs such as career and technical education, or not hiring more school counselors to combat the mental health struggles they are facing. These rising costs have also been passed on to taxpayers by raising local property taxes. Pennsylvanians deserve to know where their tax money is going and how it is spent. This charter reform package not only addresses fairness in funding, but it also includes measures that increase transparency and accountability. As a legislature, we must prioritize every student's education, and we can't do that if we hold one school to a different standard than others. This charter school reform package is long overdue for both students and taxpayers. My colleague and prime co-sponsor, Senator Jim Brewster, who couldn't be here today, but he is and has been working on these issues for years before I even got to the Senate. We worked together to ensure that varied stakeholders were consulted during the drafting of this bill. We included reforms that charter schools have been asking for, and we included reforms that school districts have been asking for. We hope to continue the conversations that we've been having and finally get a bill to Governor Wolf's desk for signature. It is now my pleasure to introduce Superintendent Dr. Robert O'Donnell from State College Area School District. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Williams, and thank you, Governor Wolf, for the opportunity to speak on this important issue. I'm happy to be here to share some thoughts about the pressing need for charter reform legislation. In an unprecedented fashion, every school board in Center, Clearfield, and Clinton counties recently passed charter reform resolutions. All 11 districts up here on the mountain, so to speak, representing a wide political spectrum, passed the same resolution demanding change. We, along with school districts throughout the Commonwealth, are united in calling for new legislation because charter school issues must be addressed now. These problems are impacting students and taxpayers, and they boil down to funding, accountability, and oversight. First, the funding formula is based on what school districts spend for required programs and services, some of which charter schools don't provide. For example, not one charter school in our region has a career and technology center for their students, but they are funded as if they do. Additionally, cyber charters don't have the same building and grounds maintenance costs as school districts, yet they receive tuition rates with those expenses included. Special education funding is another significant problem, as was mentioned earlier. The current formula provides a flat rate for all students with special needs that does not take into account actual costs. In many cases, the difference between funding and provided services is thousands of dollars for each student. Our concerns also extend to oversight and accountability. Charter school boards are appointed rather than elected. This deprives community members of any say in how their funds are being used or how the schools are being run. Charter schools call themselves public schools, but unlike districts with elected boards, charters do not have to answer to the public despite being funded by local taxpayers. Our school district community here pays almost all of our annual $6 million charter bill. Under the current law, school districts have no influence on how charter schools spend the public funds they receive and whether they are being effectively used to support equitable classroom learning. Because of lack of oversight, a charter school in our district was able to avoid scrutiny for years. The school closed recently after it was shown to be consistently failing to provide required special education services, and also following financial practices rife with conflicts of interest. Because of our current laws, this unfortunate history could easily repeat itself. In short, we believe now is the time for change for our students and taxpayers. Thank you again to Governor Wolf for this opportunity. My hope is that our state government can come together and make this better for our communities. Now, I'd like to welcome Bellefonte Area School District Board Member Donna Smith from our neighboring community. Thank you, Donna, for joining us.
Thank you, Bob. And I also appreciate the chance to speak today. My name is Donna Smith, and I serve on the Board of Education in Bellefonte. As Bob mentioned, 11 districts in our area just this week unanimously passed a joint resolution calling for charter school legislative reform. And I'm speaking on behalf of nearly 100 elected school board members who has volunteered to accept an awesome responsibility. And that responsibility is to support the education of the children in our communities and to do so with fiscal accountability. To put it simply, the current charter school laws have been in need of real reform. for many years, and the time to do something meaningful is now. Aside from the pandemic, this issue is one of the most important issues our boards face today. It's something we grapple with at every meeting. Our students deserve reform, and our communities deserve reform. So I am here today to reiterate that we 11 school boards and 11 superintendents and 100 board members are speaking with one collective voice today to ask for the following. First and foremost, as you all have mentioned, there needs to be a correction of the overall charter school funding formula. Included in that is the reforming of the special education funding that is indeed in charter school oversight. This should help to prevent conflicts of interest, which we know exist. We are also asking that school districts that have issued a charter are able to have representation on that charter school's board of directors. Another significant ask, and this is significant, but that is for the elimination of all tuition payments to cyber charter schools if a school district offers its own cyber option. And finally, we are asking that our districts are given the very same teacher certification flexibility that is given to charter schools. We believe in fairness because schools that accept public money are public schools and they all should play by the same rules. We learned in our own district, for example, and probably I can speak on behalf of every district in our state, that the cost to educate one student in our own cyber school is about a quarter of what we are required to pay for a cyber charter education. Another way to put it is that we are being charged 4 times what we know it costs to educate a student in cyber school. And we are outperforming those schools in every facet. Who pays the price? Our kids do. They pay the price when we have to cut programs, which we have, activities, services, staffing, and opportunities in order to pay for those inflated tuition bills. And they're paying the price academically. And as a former teacher, that is unconscionable. So we collective board members believe that these reforms are fair and reasonable and will not only benefit our communities and our taxpayers, but will benefit the education of our students in both regular schools and in charter schools. That's what we leaders are charged with, and it is something that needs to be made a top priority. And I thank you all for this opportunity. And with that, I would like to turn this back over to Governor Wolf. Thank you so much for your support.
Hey, thank you, Donna. And let me just say to all of you, Representative Cerisi, Senator Williams, Dr. O'Donnell, Donna, and especially Donna and Joe, you said you were on a school board. Both of my daughters are products of public school in York County, and I know the hard service that school board directors put in on our behalf. It's really hard work and it's really good work, and I appreciate everything that you do. And thank you for being here too. So now, Kevin, let's turn it over to the press for questions.
Yeah, we will now take questions from the press. Please remember to raise your hand in the Zoom option, and we will call on you. We will pause for a moment to allow you to raise your hands. We will begin with Jamie Stover. Jamie, please unmute and ask your question.
Sorry, it took a second for it to unmute. So there was a news conference just a little bit ago with some of the charter schools across the state, including cyber charter schools. And, we posed the question as to what is why should they be getting the same rate as a school if they don't have brick and mortar buildings? And they said they have, other expenses that brick and mortar buildings may not have. They also do still have some buildings. And they say that there hasn't been any questions posed to them as to exactly what their costs are. Does the state know what it costs per child on average in a cyber charter school, and how does that compare percentage-wise to the typical spending for educating a student in a regular public school?
I'm going to turn this back to the experts, the school board director and the superintendent, but as Donna said, I think I think most school districts, certainly I think all the intermediate units have a cyber option. So we know pretty much what the cost is, and so we do have a sense of what it costs to provide. In fact, some of the very software that cyber charter schools use are used in the public school system. So Donna, maybe you want to take that?
You're absolutely right, and I might not be the best person to ask, as I've only been on the school board for 2 years, but I do know that we did the numbers, and it's about $5,000 to educate one student, and $13,000 to $25,000 is walking out the door. And one of our local cyber charters is the little storefront between the Subway and the Kentucky Fried Chicken, and so it's really a struggle for us.
Dr.
I would
O'Donnell?
like to say, sorry.
Lindsay, go ahead.
So when we were working on the legislation, this was the cyber charter tuition rate was a big focus of the negotiations between all the entities. Because yes, the traditional public schools can provide their cyber education at a much lower rate, but there are costs that aren't incorporated into that number. And then there are costs with the cyber charters that when we had this legislation last year that didn't fully account for their brick and mortar costs and things. We did hear that from the charter entities. So what we did in determining the amount for the cyber charter formula is that we took the 5 highest performing cyber charter entities and took the lowest of that number. So that for this upcoming school year, that would be about $9,500. So that is an estimate based on what it actually costs those cyber entities to provide that education. And we thought that that was a fair amount. We understand that some of the school districts think that's too high and some of the cyber charters think that's too low. And we think because of that, maybe we're in the right spot to pick a number that makes sense and is fair to everyone.
Just to respond to the question, I think it varies from cyber charter to cyber charter, as it does with brick and mortar charters. We see in our local community brick and mortar charters where they are keeping the resources very close to kids and following through on the language and intent of their charter. As I said in my comments earlier, we also saw a school which paid its faculty the lowest of any public faculty in the state. And we had evidence that the money they were receiving was very distant from the kids. And then that also aligned with the fact they weren't providing special education services to kids with significant needs. And I was in those classrooms and saw those students firsthand. With cyber charters, we have evidenced that some spend as low as $1,000 per student. They subcontract it out. Some subcontract out for $3,000 per student. So it varies to really answer the question. I do think looking at audits, looking at reserves and things of that nature, you can see right now public schools having a lot less reserves than cyber charters, as we've, our plans for the next few years are to move forward with programs in our district living off reserves and hoping that we recover from this economic hit, especially in a large university community like State College. Thank you.
Okay, Kevin, back to you.
Okay, our next question will be from Jan Murphy from Penn Live. Jan, go ahead.
Okay, hi there, folks, and thank you for doing this. I was on that same call with the charter school folks, and Governor, they said that what your proposals do would cement the status quo, and I was wondering what you would have to say, to that community about that feeling about your proposals.
I guess I'm not sure what you mean, Jan. What do you mean cement the status quo? We're trying to change the status quo.
They feel that it would keep the money going to institutions without having it follow the student like they would prefer.
I, for the life of me, can't understand that interpretation. This is, we're trying to create more transparency and more accountability. I don't know, anybody want to weigh in on that? Maybe I'm missing something.
I think I'm with you, Governor. It's a little bit of a confusing statement, but what we're trying to do with this bill is allow the local districts to have a more control. Remember, there's 9 elected officials in that local district who are responsible for the budget, for the educational value, and work with our teachers and our curriculum and our PDE every day. So this bill gives local authority back somewhat to our districts. It gives a standard. The teachers' metrics that we put together that's in this. It brings the cost back down, like Senator Williams alluded to a few minutes ago about the cost of 9,500, and there was a heated argument back and forth on that 9,500. I remember being in that room in the summer. So it doesn't do the status quo at all. It also challenges some of these schools to be better, as the superintendent just spoke about. That's not a fair statement, I don't think, from them to say that it's a status quo. This challenges. And the one thing I want to put this out there, because this was important to me. The local school districts have no say in what happens in the charter schools or the cyber charter. We have no seat at the table when it comes to curriculum, staffing, hiring. So we really don't know. And I could say that, and I will say it, as a 12-year member of a school board and president of the board, that we had no insight on what was happening to our charter schools. Now I have as a state representative where I've been invited. But prior to that, and I don't know if Donna wants to touch on this, we had no insight in anything that went on in those buildings. And I think that this is moving us in a direction to be able to work together with our charter schools and improve what's happening for every child. I hope that answered it somewhat.
That's good. Thanks, Joe. Donna, you want to weigh in?
He's absolutely right. And that is frustrating that we don't know what's going on in those schools. And we're all about giving our kids the best education we can and without dragging our taxpayers over the coals. And when we see millions of dollars walking out the door, it's just, to say it's frustrating is an understatement. What could our little old school district do with $1 million, $2 million? Social workers. We need social workers. We need classroom aides. We have a building project that we've delayed for years and years and years. So there are so many wonderful things that really need to happen. And again, it's not about school choice. We believe in it. We believe in good charters and cyber charters, but we just want there to be accountability and fairness. And it's about the kids. It really is.
Just remind us all what Donna just said, the $1 or $2 million is not to say, well, let's do this instead of charter schools. We can have both. We have $1 or $2 million more dollars to spend in our traditional schools, and charter schools can still function, actually in a more accountable level. Kevin, next question.
Okay, our next question will be from Daniel from ABC 27.
So on that call earlier this morning, a lot of the charter school proponents were basically saying that they haven't even gotten a seat at the table to talk to you all about the specific costs they have and whatnot. And one woman in Philadelphia said, a $50 million cut would essentially close that school. So, what are your responses to that?
So there are two questions there, the seat at the table and whether a $50 million cut would close their school. I can't speak to that because none of us knows what goes on in the finances because there's no openness or transparency or accountability. In terms of a seat at the table, everybody has a seat at the table, all 12.8 million Pennsylvanians. This is your government, and we're making laws and rules that affect all of us. And we are all at this table. That's what a democracy is. So I'm not sure what you actually mean by that. Anybody, maybe someone else has or Lindsay or Joe, you've been part of this process.
Yes. I mean, we had sort of marathon meetings with all 4 caucuses. All the different entities were invited, and this legislation is similar to what was introduced last year. And when we had comments and concerns that were raised by the charter schools, by the school districts, those were incorporated into the proposal that we're talking about today. So we have tried to include all entities. And I myself have met with a number of charter school entities. And if any of them want to meet with me, I'm happy to meet with them again.
Yeah, and I would like to just say that same thing. We had policy committee hearings with charter school members who were at the policy committee hearings. We have spoken. I have visited the local charter school in my area. I've gotten tons of phone calls from the charter schools. But I find it interesting to the comment that, you know, nobody has a seat at the table. Well, back to Donna, I'm going to refer to Donna, and again, for my service in the school board. We were never invited for a seat at their table. We were never invited in to hear what they had to say. All the years we questioned what went on, we never received a budget. We never received curriculum. They never invited us to talk about what, where, and how. So to make a generalized statement, if they don't have a seat at the table, they never invite any of their local school boards for a seat at the table either. So they have had a seat. We have had policy meetings. We have heard from them. We've received letters. We've heard from the parents. And again, this does not eliminate them, nor does it destroy their schools. This brings it to a fairer system of funding and what happens within their institution.
And I would draw your attention to two specific portions that come to the top of my head. Is that the charter schools have been for years asking for us to amend their charters. This legislation sets forth that process so that they can amend their charter. And they have also been asking for dual enrollment, like the traditional public schools. And that is definitely a focus, I know, of Governor Wolf, of making sure that all students have access to those career pathways. And we want to make that available to charter schools. So we have been listening to those and trying to incorporate them the best that we can.
Great. Okay.
Okay. Our next question is Miles from Keystone Crossroads. Miles, go ahead and unmute.
Hey, thanks for taking the question. My question is for Governor Wolf and actually for the other legislators as well. Considering that you'll be facing most likely opposition from the Republicans who control the state house, are there things you can do via executive action, things that you can do unilaterally without having to, get a piece of legislation through the state house that you're looking at?
Not that I know of. I'll turn back to Leslie or Lindsay and Joe, but I just want to caution you that this has pretty wide bipartisan support. I mean, not every Democrat or every Republican thinks this is something that they're going to vote for, but there are a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats who I think will and really support the general idea of charter school reform. And I think what Senator Williams and Representative Cerisi are doing here is trying to have reflected in their bills and their legislation this bipartisan interest in charter school reform. So, Senator Williams, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, sure. There is a number of provisions within this bill that were actually taken directly from the Republican proposals for charter school reforms, things specifically in the area of transparency and accountability, like requiring charter schools to disclose their contracts or holding charter school trustees to the same financial and ethics reporting standards that public school board members have. Those things have broad bipartisan support. They were introduced by Republicans and are included in this bill. I have had conversations with a number of Republicans who, they're seeing the crunch in their home school districts, specifically in regards to the cyber charter tuition rate and the special ed funding. And so while we may not agree on everything in this bill, I think there is more than ever an appetite to deal with the problems that have been happening for years and get to a solution finally.
Joe, anyone want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. And the Senator is 100% right on the money on that. This is not about Democrat or Republican. It's all of us together. And we are seeing a great bipartisan showing of both representatives on both sides of the aisle. But one thing that we'll get through to a lot of our colleagues, and remember, we have a bunch of people who do have great charter schools who may be in the Democratic area too. So this is across the board. But when you go back to that representative and say that your school district will save $2.4 million, will come back to the taxpayers' base, that will help your local district, that opens the dialogue. Will the bill cross the line exactly as it's written? I don't know, but I know that putting this bill out there will give us the place to open the conversation, to begin the negotiation. And the governor alluded to this, especially in the economic times that we're having right now. If we're able to turn over $200 million back to public education without raising a nickel in taxes, we have accomplished what we've set out to do, and leaving school choice intact.
So let me just add to that. I think if from a point of view of whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a conservative or a liberal, everybody in Harrisburg was sent here to do, among other things, watch over the tax dollars that are being spent. And this charter school reform really allows us to do more of a job. We're not doing anything right now in terms of school boards can't do it. And so we need to make sure that we're making this democratic process work the way it's supposed to work, and that we hold ourselves accountable for the taxpayer dollars that are being spent in these charter schools.
Okay, our next question is Maddie Hanna from the Inquirer. Maddie, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, yes. This question would be for both the governor and lawmakers. I'm wondering what is different about the legislation that's being introduced now compared to, Governor, I know you were advocating for charter reforms last year, a little before this time last year, and that there was legislation, I believe, sponsored by the same lawmakers at the time. Is there anything different in this proposal? And you're talking about bipartisan support. I'm wondering if there's anything that's different this year that you think would enable this to move forward compared to the past.
That's a great question. Joe, you're up on the screen here. You want to start with the answer?
Sure. We never really had the opportunity to drop the bill last year because of the pandemic and everything else that happened. So the bill is basically the same exact bill that we presented last session, or would have presented last session, somewhat tweaked, but for the most part, and Lindsay, you may want to jump in here too from the Senate side, not much has changed. What has changed, though, is that our local districts have seen what it is like to be a cyber school. Almost every district throughout the Commonwealth, the 500 school districts, have seen what it is to be a cyber school and understand that when the cyber schools would come back to us and say, well, you don't understand this or you don't understand that, they do understand it now. And they have commented to us on how it works to be a cyber school. So we have more insight than we ever had before because of the pandemic. I'll turn it back to Lindsay on that too.
Yeah, I think the bulk of it is the same as what we had last year, but we had additional conversations with charter school entities and other, other entities that we incorporated. But I think the biggest change was the cyber charter funding formula. We got a lot of feedback that was too low for our initial proposal of charter entities, and we were not fully taking into account their brick and mortar costs and other costs that they had. And so we went back to the table and came up with something that we thought was more fair and was a more fair representation of what it actually cost those cyber entities to educate students.
And again, the broad outlines are exactly the same. We last year and this year were trying to improve accountability for taxpayers. We're trying to improve accountability for the educational outcomes. And we're trying to open up and make the process a lot more transparent, as it is with traditional public schools.
Okay, our next question will be from Nick from CBS 21. Nick, go ahead.
How you doing today, Governor? Dr. Dara Allen from Pittsburgh said that they believe that reform can be beneficial, but they think that things have stalled. And instead of taking away options, that the state needs to look at some other ways to kind of help them. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm not sure what options you think are that person saying, the doctor is saying that we're taking away. I think we're not taking away options. We're trying to create some accountability here from both the educational process and the tax process, but I don't know of any options we're taking away. Senator Williams, is there something that we're doing here to take options away?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that this is adding more options, adding more accountability measures, and doing some things that make it easier, both in terms of the funding and in the control for local school districts.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. That is all the time we have today. We want to thank our speakers and the media for joining us. As a reminder, video and photos of this event will be available later today for download at pacast.com. And that does conclude our press conference.
Thanks, folks.